Joining us now is Green City of Sydney Councillor Sylvie Ellsworth. Sylvie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. We've spoken to you about this before the proposals were tabled, and now you're basically looking to strengthen this, isn't it? Just if you could simplify for us, what is it that you're pushing for?
So at the moment there is a cap of 180 days. Investors can rent out their property short term for half of the year. Very few people follow those rules, but in any case, what we're pushing for is whether or not we should have a complete ban. It's so hard to find a rental anyway. In some suburbs it's less than 1% where you can get a long-term rental, and we're finding more and more things that used to be homes are now being turned into holiday lets because you can make a lot more money. So what we got support for was the council to have a look at, should we be banning for whole suburbs, say for 2 years while it's really bad during that rental crisis, or perhaps the whole local government area, a ban for people who are renting out their investment properties as holiday lets.
Right. Why are you pushing for these changes?
Well, we all know we're in the middle of a housing crisis. It's not just that people can't find somewhere to rent, like it's almost impossible to find a rental, queues out the door, but also it's very expensive. And people can make a lot more money renting out as holiday lets than long-term rentals, and that's also pushing up the price. So it's those two issues together.
So I know that Amsterdam have zoning restrictions for short-term rentals. Is that the kind of model you'd be looking for? Perhaps not an outright ban totally for short-term rentals, but just in certain places, is that it?
That's right. I mean, there's lots of options. One of our challenges is we need the support of the state government to let council change our planning rules. And so this is about putting together a proposal to say this is what we think could work. But we've heard that even if you cap, because it's often very difficult to tell if someone rents out their house for 91 days or 89 days. If the problem is really you want to stop investors from having holiday lets and you want more homes that are long-term rentals, then putting a cap on how many there can be overall or a ban for certain times. And we're not talking about the sharing economy, right? The whole thing is that if you rent out a room in your house or you're going on holiday, that's great. That means someone's staying somewhere that would have been empty otherwise. We're talking about investors getting 5, 10, 30 properties and saying, well, that used to be a long-term rental, but now I can make a lot more money short-term renting it. And it is one of the reasons that we have a difficult housing crisis.
So in your view, given that Sydney is a global city, visitors come from all over the country and all over the world, is there a place for short-term rentals? What's your view on that?
So there's a place for the sharing economy. I mean, that's what it was intended as, but the Airbnb model has effectively flipped. So now it's an investor model where 80% of listings are people having investment properties, and the system's designed with our current rules actually is more financial incentive to turn your long-term property into a short-term rental. That's what we need to block.
But what about people who don't necessarily have 10, 20, 30 investment properties but might have one?
Yeah, and we want to encourage people to make those people's homes. So we've heard examples, for example, where there's a rental on the market and people come and knock on the door and say, can I turn that into a short-term rental instead? Whole streets that used to be rental properties in Millers Point, for example, that are now all short-term rentals, and the childcare centre needed to close down, the oldest childcare centre in Sydney, because there's not enough families anymore living in the local area. A city's got to work. It's got to have the balance between great tourism and places that people can actually live, students, workers. You know, you can't have one without the other.
You said cities where there are short-term rentals, and those that have been quite successful. We were talking about Barcelona, New York, Berlin. Those are the cities that actually have these sort of restrictions. But these are the cities that have, and I'm going to say it's mandatory registration. They have access to verified data, and they have the power to issue fines as well. This is something that the Sydney councillors are pushing for as well, and don't have the power to do.
We don't currently have the power, but this is, I mean, most things with local councils, you need to get the state government approval. You say, here's our idea, let us change our planning rules in these ways. It would be ideal for the state government that started a review on short-term rentals more than 2 years ago to help give all councils these powers, and then each council could say, well, this is how much we need to limit or support short-term rental in our area.
But New South Wales, Chris Min says that he wants to understand the tourism impacts before he actually weighs in on this.
Well, we have very detailed modelling where we plan, obviously, the number of hotels that you need. And we look at, this proposal has come because we modelled the impact of short-term rentals, because we saw how much faster they were going up and how many homes we were losing. And so this is partly about getting in front before it makes the problem worse. We have all that information. We know the impact it's having on our communities.
Sylvia, what sort of responses have you been getting from this push?
Look, To be honest, it's very generational. People who are renters are really in support because they're at one end of the issue.
Yeah.
We've had some very heavy lobbying from the short-term rental economy, particularly Airbnb, and a lot of emails from people who own a lot of investment properties emailing us and saying, but you're going to impact my income stream. But also, you know, some mum and dad investors. We've heard too that one of our original proposals was about whether you should be in the house or not, hosted or unhosted, but really people want to be able to protect their right if they have their home to have it as a holiday stay. And that's consistent with the sharing economy idea, and that does give you a bit of extra room when there's a big event and people might want to go, you know what, Mardi Gras on, I'm going to move out of the inner city and I'm going to rent my property. That's great. We want that in the mix. So we've heard a lot of different things, but there's a lot of support, but it's fair to say there's a lot of strong opposition as well.